conference. Secretary Acheson has just received the count from the tellers and from the General Secretary of the conference, Dr. Kelchner.
The vote as handed to me by the tellers is as follows. 43 votes for Mr. Acheson, 2 for Mr. Spender, 2 for Sir Zafrullah Khan, and 4 abstentions, making 51 votes. It appears that the temporary president is elected as the permanent president. Thank you very much. The next business to come before the conference is the election of a vice president. Article 4 of the rules says the conference shall elect a vice president from among the members of the plenipotentiary delegations who shall serve at the request of the president and with...
From San Francisco, the city by the Golden Gate, the television networks and stations of the United States are bringing you the Japanese Peace Conference from the War Memorial Opera House. Since this morning's first plenary session at 10 o'clock, the conference has been hard at work on the business preliminary to the signing of the Japanese Peace Treaty. And now in a few moments, the third session, the third plenary business session of this Japanese Peace Conference will begin here in the War Memorial Opera House. This is Walter Cronkite speaking to you from the CBS television booth in the ring of boxes above the main floor of the Opera House itself. This evening's session will hear from the delegates of several nations in their 1 hour allotted time. That is the allotted time to each of the 52 nations here to present their views on this peace treaty. We'll hear tonight from Chile, from Bolivia, El Salvador, Ceylon, Ecuador, and Monrovia, if we can get through all of those tonight. Perhaps all of those nations will not take the full hour allotted to them, although the principal nations, the big nations, have taken their hour up to now. This afternoon, we heard from the Russian delegation, the first of the big nations to appear, although the United States and Great Britain, as the drawers of this draft peace treaty, which is being discussed here, did explain their the treaty that they have drawn up at the afternoon session as the introduction to the afternoon session. This has been a very busy day indeed here in the Opera House. The morning session was taken up with a procedural wrangle, not unfamiliar now to international gatherings. Procedural wrangle caused by the Soviet delegation and the Polish and Czechoslovakian delegation supporting, naturally, the Soviet cause here. The Soviet delegation objected in the Opera House in San Francisco. And now tonight's session apparently is about to begin.
Ross says that he does not think it necessary for an early session tomorrow morning.
We start with 4. Please be seated. Conference will come to order, please. Chair recognizes the delegate of Chile, Ambassador Nieto.
distinguished delegates, el señor presidente de Chile,
His Excellency, the President of Chile, Don Gabriel González Videla, was good enough to designate me as his plenipotentiary to sign the peace treaty with Japan. This treaty opens a new era for the peaceful economic and social development of that empire, which is called upon to be a bulwark against any expansionism. Through an erroneous path, the totalitarian group, which had seized power for more than 20 years, led Japan into inexcusable excesses. That group merited the lack of confidence of almost the whole world and contributed to the downfall of the League of Nations. It only gathered prestige among the great dictators of Europe, except perhaps one of them who, surely looking to his own interests, even though he feared the menace, he did find a cause for rejoicing in seeing that other powers in the international community presented a bulwark against that movement. The horizon offered the hope of a weakened China. Japan arrived by that fatal route to the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The blind policy engenders inexorably a series of progressive acts. Who has the misfortune of suffering from that evil, never in history has he escaped its results. Hitler and Mussolini show this. Once the offensive capacity of Japan was destroyed and the group which provoked the crisis liquidated, now has come the solemn moment of establishing juridical normality in the relations with a new Japan, a democratic Japan, a Japan willing to take its place as a progressive nation, which it never should have abandoned. The wise military occupation method put into effect by the agents of the United States conserved that which was essential in the Japanese structure, respecting the venerable imperial institutions and the basic liberties of the citizens. This facilitated the arrival at a democratic constitution and reform laws. The attitude of the principal conqueror of Japan and that of the United Kingdom indicate a notable evolution of criterion with regard to the treatment of the vanquished. The tremendous errors which were incurred by the Allies at the liquidation of the First World War of 1914 to 1918 were avoided, and the errors which were committed in Europe from the moment that the triumph over Germany and its satellites was assured, those errors likewise were avoided. For the case of Japan, prudence and generosity have been the rule. In a certain epoch, Talleyrand was advising Napoleon of the desirability of raising the vanquished. It is precisely this formula which was applied for 5 years by the American military administration in Japan, and which is found in the text which we are going to sign. This treaty is the fruit of those 5 years of political wisdom and of a year of complicated negotiations carried out among governments operating in good faith. The security measures taken in the treaty are legitimate and elementary. The international atmosphere is not in a position to continue to ignore immediate perils. Those assurances have as their purpose not only to protect the conquerors of Japan, but Japan itself, whose geographic situation indicates it as a future field of discord. They are assurances of security for all the peoples of the Pacific, in Asia as well as in America, and therefore my country participates in them. If it is at the extreme southern part of the continent, it is a producer of essential raw materials and has more than 3,000 miles of coastline. The system of security we would like to see completed with land, sea, and air forces of Japan itself, so that that country can carry out its role in the vast role of reconstruction for peace. The effective adherence of Japan to the cause of freedom is useful and it is necessary. I think that one can trust it without any fears for the future. It would not be one of those alliances which seem to be such, but were nothing but an opportunistic camouflage to carry out plans which were perfectly planned secretly. We know the results of those plans. We also will meet adverse results unless, as of now, we grant to the Japanese peace treaty the importance which it has in order to morally and materially strengthen that country. I don't doubt that some work has been done in the sense of hoping to bring about the failure or semi-failure of this conference. Against any such policy, we should all be on guard here and after this meeting is over. In some book I read that in politics, the adversary can constitute in an equal manner an obstacle or a facility, because both things, according to his convenience, do have the condition of being possible to lead toward the same objective. This dangerous pendulum of facilities and obstacles seems to have operated as a part of the prologue of this conference. And some Asiatic governments might remain in a condition of war with Japan, even after the great majority of the countries represented here have signed the peace treaty. And I think this would be a very disastrous event. The circumstance that some countries preserve the enemy, and this is a historical phrase, even in a technical sense, is not a contribution to the general well-being. The government of Chile considers that it is essential at this time that it set forth its clear and unmistakable viewpoint relative to Article 2, subparagraph E of the treaty. Article 2, subparagraph E, with regard to that which refers to our sovereignty and jurisdiction over a sector of the Antarctic area. I do this in the form of a statement requesting that you keep in mind with regard to it the antecedents of this conference. And, of course, my country's signature will appear in the treaty, taking definitely into account the interpretation which my country gives to it, trusting that the texts in the 5 languages will not lend themselves later to discussion. As a country directly interested in the Antarctic area, where Chile has rights and titles which back up the sovereignty which it exercises in the Chilean Antarctic area between 53 and 90 degrees Greenwich, it is of a special interest to my government. This clause is of a special interest which excludes precisely and clearly all claim of Japan to being able to invoke supposed rights, titles, or interests in the Antarctic area. In effect, Article 2, subparagraph E of the treaty provides textually that Japan renounces all claim to any right or title to or interest in connection with any part of the Antarctic area, whether deriving from the activities of Japanese nationals or otherwise. In the opinion of my government, this clause is timely and necessary because it puts a period to the prior and subsequent claims of Japan to the Antarctic area. This clear stipulation, which is unequivocal, is completely in agreement with the position maintained by my government in rejecting publicly and categorically and declaring in 1940 a declaration, in rejecting a declaration